All right. Well, today we're going to watch a video with Ilya talking about the state of AI. He's talking about that we're moving back from the scaling age to the research age because scaling has kind of run its course at this point. So, we'll go ahead and go take a look at that video. And I'm gonna mute myself for a minute here while we listen to this.
That all of this is real.
Yeah, meaning
Don't,
what?
don't you think so?
Meaning what?
Like all this AI stuff and all
Like it
this
actually
Bay
happened?
Area, yeah, that it's happened. Like, isn't it straight out of science fiction?
Yeah. Another thing that's crazy is like how normal the slow takeoff feels. The idea that we'd be investing 1% of GDP in AI, like I feel like it would have felt like a bigger deal, you know? Where right now it just feels like,
And we get used to things pretty fast, turns out, yeah. But also, it's kind of like it's abstract. Like, what does it mean? What it means that you see it in the news
yeah,
that such and such company announced such and such dollar amount.
right,
That's all you see.
right.
It's not really felt in any other way so far.
Yeah. Should we actually begin here? I think this is an interesting discussion.
Sure.
I think your point about, well, from the average person's point of view, nothing is that different will continue being true even into the singularity.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, interesting.
So the thing which I was referring to, not feeling different, is okay. So such and such company announced some difficult to comprehend dollar amount of investment.
Right.
I don't think anyone knows what to do with that.
Yeah.
But I think that the impact of AI is going to be felt. AI is going to be diffused through the economy. There are very strong economic forces for this. And I think the impact is going to be felt very strongly.
When do you expect that impact? I think the models seem smarter than their economic impact would imply.
Yeah, this is one of the very confusing things about the models right now. How to reconcile the fact that they are doing so well on evals.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at the evals and you go, those are pretty hard evals.
Right.
They're doing so well. But the economic impact seems to be dramatically behind.
Yes.
And it's almost like it's very difficult to make sense of how can the model on the one hand do these amazing things, and then on the other hand, like repeat itself twice in some situation in a kind of an example would be, let's say you use vibe coding to do.
So something that I'm thinking of here that's kind of interesting is that they're asking like, why, given the models are so good on the evals, are they not having an economic impact? And this kind of reminds me of something I learned multiple times, one time in law school, but actually throughout my life, that it's not always the smartest people that have the largest economic impact. If you look at people that are incredibly intelligent, people who know a lot of facts, people like that one Jeopardy or the man with the highest IQ in the world, they're not having a tremendous economic impact. And maybe that's because the economy isn't the smartest thing to do, or maybe it's because it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to have an economic impact. I think it's probably a little bit of both, and there's probably some other things that play into that as well, where ultimately intelligence does not equate to economic impact. What does equate to economic impact, if we're talking about an individual, is someone who's incredibly driven to make money. That is where economic impact comes from. Because if there is no, I mean, the economy essentially is trade. The economy is an exchange of value. And what drives the exchange of value above just a standard base level is that some people have an outsized amount of value to exchange, and therefore new things can come about that require a lot of value. So these things don't come out of nowhere. Like, you can just look at OpenAI and see that there have been billions and billions and maybe even trillions of dollars invested at this point. That didn't come from mom and pops. That didn't come from average Joe. That came from the top 0.01% of the economy. And that sector of the economy is most likely primarily interested in money and making money as their major objective. And that's why they have so much money. It's not because they're the most intelligent. It's because that's the goal that they've set out and they're motivated to do it. And so it seems like to me, it's very obvious. Intelligence does not equal richness. It doesn't equal a great economy. Now, what happens when you have intelligence that can be owned? Well, then when the people who are very interested in making a lot of money figure out how to use it, I think that's going to be when things change. Let's get back to this video real quick.
Do something, and you go to some place, and then you get a bug, and then you tell the model, "Can you please fix the bug?"
Yeah.
And the model says, "Oh my God, you're so right. I have a bug. Let me go fix that." And it introduces a second bug.
Yeah.
And then you tell it, you have the second bug.
Right.
And it tells you, "Oh my God, how could I have done it? You're so right again." And brings back the first bug.
Yeah.
And you can alternate between those.
Yeah.
And it's like, how is that possible?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not sure. But it does suggest that something strange is going on. I have two possible explanations. So here, this is the more kind of a whimsical explanation, is that maybe RL training makes the models a little bit too single-minded and narrowly focused, a little bit too...
So now he's really getting into talking about like, oh, well, maybe it's because the models aren't good enough. So at first he said, oh, they're so incredible that it doesn't make sense. It's hard to make sense of why there hasn't been a huge economic impact. But then he starts questioning whether the models are good. And maybe that's the reason why it's not doing so well. So I don't know. I think that maybe he's getting a little confused here, because the reality is that that the models are very good, and the reason why the models aren't making a lot of money, like I said, is probably nothing to do with how intelligent they are. It's to do with people that are incredibly driven to make money figuring out how to use them. The thing is, the models are very good at intelligent things. They are not self-motivated. So although they're really great at intelligent things, the people who make a lot of money aren't great at intelligent things. They're great at making money. They're great at the basics of, and they're motivated at the basics of the economy. And that means delivering some kind of value where other people aren't, and receiving more money for it than you spent on it. And that's pretty basic stuff. It's not like you need to be incredibly intelligent to realize that, but you just need to be motivated. Now, typically, people, even smart people, even incredibly intelligent people, we're all kind of focused on money to some degree. That's just the way we are, and that's in contrast to an AI. An AI isn't interested in money at all unless you tell it to be. It's really not interested in anything unless you tell it to. It's just interested in predicting the next word based on the context around that word. That's one, at least an LLM. So without that driving force, without something driving it, it's not going to, on its own, create economic value. Somebody needs to come and carry it, cause it to create economic value. Then we'll see. Then we'll see that it has a big impact. But until that happens, it's, until somebody comes and drives it, that's not going to happen. The problem is there's not many people around who are going to drive it right now. There aren't people who understand how to use it and who want to make money out of it. There are a lot of people who really understand how to use it, but don't really want to make money out of it. They just kind of want to play with it. They want to use it. And then there are people who want to make money, but they don't see a way of using it to make money because it's doing things that are very smart, things that they probably don't care about because it's overly complicated compared to it's an overly complicated thing to do to make money compared to the kinds of things they can do to make money. Like they can open up 100 hamburger stores and make money, and that's pretty simple to do. It's pretty straightforward versus trying to solve incredibly hard math problems or create the next computer program that everybody's going to use. Like those are incredibly hard problems. You're building something new that people aren't using yet. You're discovering something new. You're creating new things. It's not just the creation that's hard. It's actually getting anyone to care about it. It's actually getting people to use it. But if everybody wants a hamburger already, if everybody needs gas or cigarettes or other things that we all need, then manufacturing those things is a pretty straightforward way to make a lot of money. So it just makes sense that the people who want to make money aren't quite yet using AI because the things that it's doing are very difficult.
I don't know, unaware, even though it also makes them aware in some other ways. And because of this, they can't do basic things. But there is another explanation, which is back when people were doing pre-training, the question of what data to train on was answered because that answer was everything.
Yeah.
When you do pre-training, you need all the data. So you don't have to think it's going to be this data or that data.
Yeah.
But when people do RL training, they do need to think. They say, okay, we want to have this kind of RL training for this thing and that kind of RL training for that thing. And from what I hear, all the companies have teams that just produce new RL environments and just add it to the training mix. And then the question is, well, what are those? There are so many degrees of freedom. There is such a huge variety of RL environments you could produce. And one thing you could do, and I think that's something that is done inadvertently, is that people take inspiration from the evals. You say, hey, I would love our model to do really well when we release it. I want the evals to look great. What would be RL training that could help on this task, right? I think that is something that happens, and I think it could explain a lot of what's going on. If you combine this with generalization of the models actually being inadequate, that has the potential to explain a lot of what we are seeing, this disconnect between eval performance and actual real world performance, which is something that we don't today exactly even understand what we mean by that.
I like this idea that the real reward hacking is the human researchers who are too focused on the evals. I think there's two ways to understand or to try to think about what you have just pointed out. One is, look, if it's the case that simply by becoming superhuman at a coding competition, a model will not automatically become more tasteful and exercise better judgment about how to improve your code base, well, then you should expand the suite of environments such that you're not just testing it on having the best performance in a coding competition. It should also be able to make the best kind of application for X thing or Y thing or Z thing. And another, maybe this is what you're hinting at, is to say, why should it be the case in the first place that becoming superhuman at coding competitions doesn't make you a more tasteful programmer more generally? Maybe the thing to do is not to keep stacking up the amount of environments and the diversity of environments to figure out an approach which lets you learn from one environment and improve your performance on something else.
So, and suppose you have two students. One of them decided they want to be the best competitive programmer, so they will practice 10,000 hours for that domain. They will solve all the problems, memorize all the proof techniques, and be very, very, be very skilled at quickly and correctly implementing all the algorithms. And by doing so, they became the best, one of the best. Student number two thought, oh, competitive programming is cool. Maybe they practiced for 100 hours, much, much less, and they also did really well. Which one do you think is going to do better in their career later on?
The second.
Right? And I think that's basically what's going on. The models are much more like the first student, but even more, because then we say, okay, so the model should be good at competitive programming. So let's get every single competitive programming problem ever. And then let's do some data augmentation so we have even more competitive programming problems.
Yes.
And we train on that. And so now you got this great competitive programmer. And with this analogy, I think it's more intuitive. I think it's more intuitive with this analogy that, yeah, okay, so if it's so well trained, okay, it's like all the different algorithms and all the different proof techniques are like right at its fingertips. And it's more intuitive that with this level of preparation, it would not necessarily generalize to other things.
But then what is the analogy for what the second student is doing before they do the 100 hours of fine-tuning?
I think it's like they have it. I think it's the it factor.
Yeah.
Right? And like I know, like when I was an undergrad, I remember there was a student like this that studied with me. So I know it exists.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to distinguish it from whatever pre-training does. So one way to understand what you just said about we don't have to choose the data in pre-training is to say, actually, it's not dissimilar to the 10,000 hours of practice. It's just that you get that 10,000 hours of practice for free because it's already somewhere in the pre-training distribution. But it's like, maybe you're suggesting actually, there's actually not that much generalization in pre-training. There's just so much data in pre-training. But it's like, it's not necessarily generalizing better than RL.
Like the main strength of pre-training is that there is A, so much of it.
Yeah.
And B, you don't have to think hard about what data to put into pre-training. And it's a very kind of natural data, and it does include in it a lot of what people do.
Yeah.
People's thoughts and a lot of the features of, it's like the whole world as projected by people onto text.
Yeah.
And pre-training tries to capture that using a huge amount of data. Pre-training is very difficult to reason about because it's so hard to understand the manner in which the model relies on pre-training data. And whenever the model makes a mistake, could it be because something by chance is not as supported by the pre-training data? And support by pre-training is maybe a loose term. I don't know if I can add anything more useful on this, but I don't think there is a human analog to pre-training.
Here's analogies that people have proposed for what the human analogy.
So I actually disagree on this. I think there is a human analogy to pre-training, and that is evolution. That is the millions and billions of years of biological evolution to the point where we are now. That is the pre-training. The pre-training is the genetic building blocks that create our neural and nerve structure. So we don't function like we function because we decided to or out of thin air. We do that on the basis of neurons and nerves and a body with sensors and actuators. So the pre-training is all of that time. Our bodies, our system, our nervous system, our neurons, our brain learning how to use all that stuff. And then when we're born and we start to get educated, we're just building on top of that. We're just choosing to exercise certain parts of that we find more valuable, we're fine-tuning ourselves into the current environment. So pre-training does exist, I think, in the real world. And for these large language models, we're taking all of human knowledge and pre-training them on that. The thing is, not all people's genetic makeup has experienced all things, all knowledge paths. Like, for instance, I don't have any nuclear physicists in my genetic line. There are none. There are no Nobel Peace Prize winners in my genetic line. So I don't have any chance of having that information in my genetic line. Whereas what makes an LLM special is that it does have the chance to have that in its line. So an LLM can take all of the output of all of the people that have ever lived and summarize that and sum that together into a single set of pre-training that incorporates every written piece of human knowledge, which tends to be the creme de la creme of learning, I guess. Now, there are things that aren't written. I was talking to my dad about this the other day. There are things that haven't been written down or aren't written around profusely enough to wind up in the statistically significant distribution of an LLM's training regime, and therefore the LLM doesn't really learn them. There's a lot of stuff like that. So the LLM doesn't have that. But what it does have is all the things that we've deemed so valuable as a collective group that we've written them down multiple times over and over and over again in different forms. Pre-training it is just baking all that in. Post-training, fine-tuning, optimizing, that is all deciding what out of all that information do we want to focus on. Just like a human being does. We learn in our lives to focus ourselves on the things that we think are the most valuable. And, the pre-training that an LLM does, even though it has taken all this writing, not all writing is good. Not all writing has great value. Some writing has no value. But it does have structure. It does have semantic, lexical structure to it, which the LLM can learn fundamentals from. So it's kind of like reading for the sake of reading versus reading for the sake of learning, of economic value, or of becoming valuable in general. Let's get back to it.
To pre-training is, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on why they're potentially wrong. One is to think about the first 18 or 15 or 13 years of a person's life when they aren't necessarily economically productive, but they are doing something that is making them understand the world better and so forth. And the other is to think about evolution as doing some kind of search for 3 billion years, which then results in a human lifetime instance. And then I'm curious if you think either of these are actually analogous to pre-training, or how would you think about at least what lifetime human learning is like, if not pre-training?
I think there are some similarities between both of these two pre-training, and pre-training tries to play the role of both of these. But I think there are some big differences as well. The amount of pre-training data is very, very staggering.
Yes.
And somehow a human being, after even 15 years, with a tiny fraction of that pre-training data, they know much less.
Yeah.
But whatever they do know, they know much more deeply, somehow. And the mistakes, like already at that age, you would not make mistakes that RAIs make.
Yeah.
There is another thing. You might say, could it be something like evolution? And the answer is maybe. But in this case, I think evolution might actually have an edge. Like there is this, I remember reading about this case where that one thing that neuroscientists do, or rather one way in which neuroscientists can learn about the brain, is by studying people with brain damage to different parts of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like interesting. I'm really interested in hearing these guys talk because I feel like they're just missing so much of they're so off in so many ways, and how they're thinking about this. I know Ilya is one of the most respected people in AI right now, but it's surprising to me how wrong he is about his perspective on this. For instance, like he's comparing AI making mistakes to the fact that a child won't make the same mistakes. But what he's neglecting to understand there is that the system that we're evaluating the AI on comes from humans. It is born from human nature. Like we're creating these systems, these evaluations out of human nature. Humans are born experts on a lot of this stuff. Like I think there's this assumption that because of the last 100 years or so, we've had all this crazy innovation that we've never been intelligent, that we've never had a level of intelligence like we do now. And I think that's false. I think that we just haven't been this focused. I think we haven't had access to these resources. And I think that we just like haven't had enough people, enough population to allow us to have the time and the resources and to pool the resources to do these kinds of things. And so like the kinds of things that a child isn't going to make a mistake on aren't, and I can tell you this because I have kids, they aren't the things that are difficult. The children won't make mistakes on things that are super obvious. Like they're not going to, after they've fallen down the stair one time, they're not going to fall down the stair again. When they make mistakes that cause pain, they learn pretty quickly. But they don't know the difference between spending $1,000 and spending one. I can guarantee you that. Not until they learn that lesson. They do not learn that easily. It takes time. It takes explanation. It takes experience. And at a certain age, no matter how many times you tell a kid, don't spend $1,000 on a lollipop, they still won't learn it. So I think he's really missing a lot of important perspective here. First of all, also like evolution absolutely is like pre-training. I mean, we have our genes create our neurons. They create our nervous system. Our nervous system is our computer. It is our neural network. It is like literally analogous to an AI neural network. And there's no reason to think that evolution isn't the pre-training and that equivalent to pre-training. Not that it matters. Who cares? I mean, I guess we're trying to create a copy of ourselves, and in that light, it matters. But yeah, it's interesting to me still. These guys totally. I feel like they should get this way better than they do, being experts in the way they are.
And some people have the most strange symptoms you could imagine. It's actually really, really interesting. And there was one case that comes to mind that's relevant. I read about this person who had some kind of brain damage that took out, I think, a stroke or an accident that took out his emotional processing. So he stopped feeling any emotion. And as a result of that, he still remained very articulate and he could solve little puzzles, and on tests he seemed to be just fine. But he felt no emotion. He didn't feel sad. He didn't feel angry. He didn't feel animated. And he became somehow extremely bad at making any decisions at all. It would take him hours to decide on which socks to wear, and he would make very bad financial decisions. And that's very... What does it say about the role of our built-in emotions in making us like a viable agent, essentially? And I guess to connect...
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I think there's a lot to unpack there around emotions. I don't have all the answers, obviously, but and I'm not going to pretend I do in this case, but for sure, emotions are considered part of our motivational structure. Like we try to be happy, we try not to be sad. When we're angry, we do stupid things, but we also don't like being angry, don't want to be angry, or we don't want other people to be angry. Motivation, I mean, someone being intelligent and like coming up with the answer to a math problem, like who cares? Like just do that. But like emotion has a very big impact because emotion drives us beyond rationality. It's pushing us to do something not because it's rational, but because we feel something. Not because it's the right answer, but because we feel happy about it. So this is motivation. This is essentially what makes humans able to have economic value. Like we're motivated to do something. With that motivation, we seek out to do something that people like we want money. We're motivated to have money because it makes us happy because we can buy things, and having food and having luxury and having technology makes us happy because it feels good. It doesn't necessarily make our life better in every way, but it feels good. It feels good to ride in a nice car, but a really bad car will get you there as well. You can ask why it feels good, but that's not really the important question with this topic. The important question is whether AIs feel or have extrinsic motivation outside of logical, semantic, lexical directives. And feeling is something we've evolved. Feeling is something that came about through pain and happiness and suffering and joy. It's relief. It's being chased by a lion and somebody comes out of nowhere and stabs the lion. Like that's what happiness is. And sadness is like losing a child or losing a loved one or losing a friend. And like AI doesn't have that. It's never had that. And it understands the semantics of that. It understands the lexical aspect of that, but it doesn't understand the feeling. It doesn't ever have a feeling. It connects the semantics together intellectually to understand what something means in the context of the human writing, but it doesn't actually feel that. And so feeling is like feeling is a physical thing. It's a physical phenomenon where chemicals are released in the body. You don't feel in your brain. You feel in your heart. You feel in your arms and your legs and your stomach. You never feel in your brain. You feel in your cheeks. AIs don't have cheeks. They don't have hearts. They don't have bellies. And so they aren't feeling anything. A hungry belly is a motivating thing, is what I'm saying. And a heavy heart is also a motivating thing. We seek emotional equilibrium, peace. We want to be at peace and we want to have peace. So, because okay, so here's the thing is like our bodies have learned over a long period of time to seek out that peace. And our bodies have learned that because our brains are connected to our bodies. And our brains, our neural network, our stem, our brain stem, tells our body when something is bad and when something's going to cause pain, or when something is good and when it's going to cause joy. We've been pre-trained neurally to know that stuff. And that's how we get above nature. That's how we get above our basal nature. We have been preconditioned to seek out before we experience any stimulation to be successful or to be economically free or to have a love or to have children and to treat them well. Because we're not just doing it for survival, we're doing it because we know how it's going to feel when we do the thing that we're doing. So we're doing it because we know it's going to create a feeling in the future. And that feeling is very powerful for us. So it's interesting that someone who's been who's had a part of their brain responsible for feeling removed loses the ability to make good decisions. Maybe partially because it damages their motivation.
To your question about
Yes.
pre-training, it's like maybe maybe if you're good enough at like getting everything out of pre-training, you could get that as well. But that's the kind of thing which seems, well, it may or may not be possible to get that from pre-training.
What is that? Clearly not just directly emotion. It seems like some almost value function like thing, which is telling you which decision to be made, like what the end reward for any decision should be. And you think that doesn't sort of implicitly come from?
I think it could.
Pre-training.
I'm just saying it's not 100% obvious.
Yeah. But what is that? Like, how do you think about emotions? And what is the ML analogy for emotions?
It should be some kind of a value function thing.
Yeah.
But I don't think there is a great ML analogy because right now value functions don't play a very prominent role in the things people do.
It might be worth defining for the audience what a value function is if you want to do that.
I mean, certainly, I'll be very happy to do that, right? So when people do reinforcement learning, the way reinforcement learning is done right now, how do people train those agents? So you have a neural net, and you give it a problem, and then you tell the model, go solve it. And the model takes maybe thousands, hundreds of thousands of actions or thoughts or something, and then it produces a solution. The solution is graded. And then the score is used to provide a training signal for every single action in your trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that if you are doing something that goes for a long time, if you're training a task that takes a long time to solve, you will do no learning at all until you come up with a proposed solution. That's how reinforcement learning is done naively. That's how O1, R1 ostensibly are done. The value function says something like, okay, look, maybe I could sometimes, not always, could tell you if you are doing well or badly. The notion of a value function is more useful in some domains than others. So for example, when you play chess and you lose a piece, I messed up. You don't need to play the whole game to know that what I just did was bad, and therefore whatever preceded it was also bad.
I feel like he was onto something there, and then he kind of like stepped back a little bit. I feel like he could make these points a little easier, like especially this one. So what they're saying is that we learn, or the AI, like O1 and R1, are learning through reinforcement learning, where they try to solve an agentic problem, and then only when they get the result and it's graded do they actually learn. That's the moment of learning where the answer is scored and this somehow adjusts the decisions it makes. Now, I'm not sure about the mechanism. Is it back propagation or what? I'm assuming it needs to be. So, but the people are the same way. I mean, we learn at the moment we're evaluated. I don't know if my chess moves are good the first time I play chess until the chess game is over. For all I know, losing my rook to a pawn could be a good thing. I won't know that until much later and after playing multiple games, unless somebody's told me, unless somebody's giving me that information. Now that's and that can be done too, and an LLM can certainly do that. But ultimately, I don't know if it's going to win the game or not unless I experience it, unless somebody tells me and I really trust them, and they tell me enough times about all the different scenarios. And so, like, someone who gets good at chess plays chess a lot, and they start to realize which patterns, which strategies win more often, and they get a reward for that because they win the game. They don't get the reward until they win. And if they win a little bit early because the other person realizes that there's no way for the other person to defeat them, then they're winning at that point because the other person forfeits, not because, or if they realize that they're going to win, maybe that's hubris even, because what if they make a mistake? Like it doesn't, the point of evaluation is kind of irrelevant. We could do it more frequently. The fact is, you don't learn till you get evaluated.
So the value function lets you short circuit the wait until the very end. Like, let's suppose that you started to pursue some kind of okay, let's suppose that you are doing some kind of a math thing or a programming thing, and you're trying to explore a particular solution direction. And after, let's say, after 1,000 steps of thinking, you concluded that this direction is unpromising. As soon as you conclude this, you could already get a reward signal 1,000 time steps previously when you decided to pursue down this path. You say, oh, next time I shouldn't pursue this path in a similar situation, long before you actually came up with the proposed solution.
This was in the DeepSeek R1 paper, is that the space of trajectories is so wide that maybe it's hard to learn a mapping from an intermediate trajectory and value. And also given that, in coding, for example, you'll have the wrong idea, then you'll go back, then you'll change something.
This sounds like such lack of faith in deep learning.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, sure, it might be difficult, but nothing deep learning can't do.
Yeah.
So my expectation is that, like, value functions should be useful, and I fully expect that they will be used in the future, if not already. What was I alluding to with the person whose emotional center got damaged is more that maybe what it suggests is that the value function of humans is modulated by emotions in some important way that's hard-coded by evolution. And maybe that is important for people to be effective in the world.
That's the thing I was actually planning on asking you. There's something really interesting about emotions of the value function, which is that it's impressive that they have this much utility while still being rather simple to understand.
So I have two responses. I do agree that compared to the kind of things that we learn and the things we are talking about, the kind of as we are talking about, emotions are relatively simple. They might even be so simple that maybe you could map them out in a human understandable way. I think it would be cool to do. In terms of utility, though, I think there is a thing where, there is this complexity robustness trade-off, where complex things can be very useful, but simple things are very useful in a very broad range of situations. And so I think what one way to interpret what we are seeing is that we've got these emotions that essentially evolved mostly from our mammal ancestors, and then fine-tuned a little bit while we were hominids, just a bit. We do have like a decent amount of social emotions, though, which mammals may lack. But they're not very sophisticated. And because they're not sophisticated, they serve us so well in this very different world compared to the one that we've been living in. Actually, they also make mistakes. For example, our emotions, well, I don't know, does hunger count as an emotion? It's debatable, but I think, for example, our intuitive feeling of hunger is not succeeding in guiding us correctly in this world with an abundance of food.
Yeah. People have been talking about scaling data, scaling parameters, scaling compute. Is there a more general way to think about scaling? What are the other scaling axes?
So they're talking about hunger and emotion, and I think it makes sense to actually just talk about feelings, senses. It's highly likely that emotions are a form of sensing, not necessarily sensing the external world, but sensing our internal world. Just like hunger. Hunger is interesting because hunger, I suppose we sort of like have this strange connection with our stomach where it's ingesting things from the outside world. So in a way, it's a sensor to the outside world, but it's inside of us. But we're sensing the thing inside of us, which is our stomach, which is sensing food or the lack of food. So it's feeling things from the outside world that are inside of us. And emotion is similar in that we're feeling our bodies and we're feeling the impact of the world on our bodies. I think the interesting thing about emotion is that emotion isn't simply like pain. Emotion is one layer abstracted from things like pain or pleasure. Emotion is an expression of the second order or higher order result or impact on our system. So we have a system that senses. There's almost like a neuron or a brain function, a very low level brain function, maybe not even that sophisticated, that is looking a few layers deep, abstracting a few layers deep against emotion. I mean, against feeling, against sensing. And so when we feel pleasure, or when we think we're going to feel pleasure, or when our brain senses we're going to feel pleasure, it's activating the parts of our body that are activated by the brain, which in turn, our body is sensing those parts being activated. So like when you get aroused, your brain is triggering that arousal based on thoughts, probably, about what's about to happen. But your body is now sensing that activity, that arousal, and which teaches your brain about the abstracted feeling, which is the prior feeling, that this thought is going to lead to this arousal, which is going to lead to this event, which you're motivated to have because you know that there's going to be pleasure. So that's like 3 levels of abstraction, and your brain emotion is your brain and your nervous system relaying that information back and forth through action and sense to create and then the fact that you're learning that over time, because that's happened for like on an evolutionary scale for humans and for mammals. That is what emotion is. And so that's like a pre-training. Thing is, AI doesn't have that because AI doesn't have sex. AI doesn't die. AI doesn't get born. AI just pops into existence and then pops out of existence without any fanfare, without any consequences, really. There are almost no consequences for AI. And so, and in order to, I'm not saying if we gave it consequences, it would automatically have feelings and emotions. I'm saying that it would need to learn it would need to learn that those feelings and emotions have some sort of impact and connect those to some part of it that is much lower level, that is much dumber, that is much more primal in order to feel emotions. So it would almost, you could like connect it with like an energy drain. Like, okay, so it like all of a sudden gets lower energy. But it's not sophisticated enough to understand that. It's not sophisticated enough to sense that and realize that there's a consequence. It's not imagining the consequences. It's not imagining at all. An AI doesn't imagine. It simply acts. It simply acts. And like we said, it doesn't find out if it's right or wrong until the end. We don't either, but we've done that for so long that we already know the answers and they're baked into us. So, yeah, let's keep going.
So the thing, so here is a perspective. Here's a perspective that I think might be true. So the way ML used to work is that people would just tinker with stuff and try to get interesting results. That's what's been going on in the past. Then the scaling insight arrived, right? Scaling laws, GPT-3, and suddenly everyone realized we should scale. And it's just this is an example of how language affects thought. Scaling is just one word, but it's such a powerful word because it informs people what to do. They say, okay, let's try to scale things. And so you say, okay, so what are we scaling? And pre-training was a thing to scale. It was a particular scaling recipe.
Yes.
The big breakthrough of pre-training is the realization that this recipe is good. So you say, hey, if you mix some compute with some data into a neural net of a certain size, you will get results. And you will know that it will be better if you just scale the recipe up. And this is also great. Companies love this because it gives you a very low risk way of investing your resources.
Yeah.
Right? It's much harder to invest your resources in research. Compare that. If you research, you need to have go forth researchers and research and come up with something versus get more data, get more compute, you'll get something from pre-training. And indeed, it looks like based on various things some people say on Twitter, maybe it appears that Gemini have found a way to get more out of pre-training. At some point, though, pre-training will run out of data. The data is very clearly finite. And so then, okay, what do you do next? Either you do some kind of a souped up pre-training, different recipe from the one we've done before, or you're doing RL, or maybe something else. But now that compute is big, compute is now very big, in some sense, we are back to the age of research. So maybe here's another way to put it. Up until 2020, from 2012 to 2020, it was the age of research. Now, from 2020 to 2025, it was the age of scaling, or maybe plus minus. Let's add error bars to those years, because people say, this is amazing, you got to scale more, keep scaling, the one word, scaling. But now the scale is so big, is the belief really that, oh, it's so big, but if you had 100x more, everything would be so different? It would be different for sure. But is the belief that if you just 100x the scale, everything would be transformed? I don't think that's true. So it's back to the age of research again, just with big computers.
That's a very interesting way to put it. But let me ask you the question you just posed then. What are we scaling, and what would it mean to have a recipe? Because I guess I'm not aware of a very clean relationship that almost looks like a law of physics, which existed in pre-training. There was a power law between data or computer parameters and loss. What is the kind of relationship we should be seeking, and how should we think about what this new recipe might look like?
So we've already witnessed a transition from one type.
So, I mean, the problem with scaling right now is not that it doesn't work. It's just that we don't have any more data. I mean, we're sort of out of data here, right? Like Google has access to a lot of data and they've used it. I mean, so if they have data that they're not able to use because they don't have enough computers, well then yeah, scaling is going to continue to work. But as soon as they run out of data, as soon as we run out of data, scaling won't work because it does, like, processing the same data over and over and over again doesn't change anything. I mean, yeah, okay, you got to process the same data over and over, but there comes a point where there's diminishing returns. Like if these models are converging on the data we have, throwing more compute at it doesn't change anything. It just maybe happens faster. And reinforcement learning is going to take so much time because it requires a human in the loop to grade every result. That is starting to work on something closer to like an industrial timescale. It takes time. We have to build these things. We have to throw a lot of people at them for them to get good. And then architectural improvements, that's probably not going to do anything. I think Jan LeCun is actually onto something with the world model approach, where if we can actually place these things into the world in a way where they have to model the world around them, not just linguistically, but also physically, maybe even economically themselves, figure out a way for themselves to survive. Like, then we use evolution of these systems economically, then they become economically motivated. If the ones that we keep are only the ones that make money, then we keep the ones that are motivated to make money, and then we have AIs that can make money. And so these models actually need to go beyond language, and they need to do reinforcement learning in the real world, maybe even in a simulated environment. That might be okay. But they need to be in these simulated environments, which would be great, learning at a very high rate and using evolutionary rules to determine which version of these models we keep. So you can imagine a model that's being that's trying to survive in a simulation, economics of a simulation, and it loses all its money. Well, you don't keep that model. You throw it away. You start over again with a new model. Or maybe you take the last checkpoint where that model was actually making money. Or maybe you do a combination of both, where you start over and you start the model from its highest point of economic value. And then you do that thousands and thousands and thousands of times. Compute will definitely help with that. Simulating the environment that it's going to be good at learning, that you want it to learn, over and over and over again with reinforcement learning and evolution, could result in an AI that's smarter than the ones we have now.
A different type of scaling, from pre-training to RL. Now people are scaling RL. Now, based on what people say on Twitter, they spend more compute on RL than on pre-training at this point, because RL can actually consume quite a bit of compute.
Yeah.
You do very, very long rollouts.
Yes.
So it takes a lot of compute to produce those rollouts. And then you get relatively small amount of learning per rollout. So you really can spend a lot of compute. And I could imagine, like, I wouldn't at this stage, it's more like, I wouldn't even call it a scaling. I would say, hey, like, what are you doing? And is the thing you are doing the most productive thing you could be doing?
Yeah.
Can you find a more productive way of using your compute? We've discussed the value function business earlier, and maybe once people get good at value functions, they will be using their resources more productively. And if you find a whole other way of training models, you could say, is this scaling or is it just using your resources? I think it becomes a little bit ambiguous, in a sense that when people were in the age of research, Back then, it was like people say, hey, let's try this and this and this. Let's try that and that and that. Oh, look, something interesting is happening. And I think there will be a return to that.
So if we're back in the era of research, stepping back, what is the part of the recipe that we need to think most about? When you say value function, people are already trying the.
I don't know if I agree that we're back in the age of research. Like, this doesn't need to be a research problem anymore. It's now the all the information has been researched. Like, we've done a lot of research on evolution, right? We know how evolution. We know a lot about evolution, about how it might function. It's an engineering problem now. It's a matter of building a system that incorporates evolution as part of the engineered system. Deploying that system in a simulation until it's successful, it's like a manufacturing process. It's not research. We know that reinforcement learning works. We know that simulations work. We know that AI can learn if given data, which is what reinforcement learning is. We know we can pre-train models to have sort of like baked in capabilities that allow us to take advantage of our linguistic record of the world. So we can build a basic world model from that. And then we can use that to help the AI direct it while it's learning in a world, while it's learning in a physical sense. So with signs or with books that with information that tells it what to do in a situation. So it can show up and we can say, now run 100 meters, and it can run 100 meters in a simulation, and we can time it. And we go, well, you're not the fastest in the world, and therefore you're penalized, and we penalize it. And then it comes back the next time and it goes, okay, now I'm going to try again. We penalize it again because it didn't make it. Now it comes back again. It does that 1,000 times. On the 856th time, it gets a faster time, and we reward it by allowing it some measure of success that in the simulation rewards it. We could go pretty nuts on those rewards. We could have, if we're just focused on it being the best AI in terms of running a race, well, then the reward could be simply that it gets to run again. Then all the AIs that didn't run fast fail, and we keep simulating AIs against each other until we come up with one that beat all the other ones because it made the right choices. It did the right things to go fast. This is evolution, and this requires a lot of compute, and that's an engineering problem. It's a scaling problem. The question I think that I have is whether LLMs have the ability to transfer knowledge to a world model. Like, what semantic space does a world model exist if not in language? We express our models in the language of math, which is a language. It has rules, it has syntax, it has semantics. We don't have another way of like computing is symbolic. And because it's symbolic, language is what is the medium upon which it's built. And so any world model must be built on some symbolic language to some degree, because otherwise it's not really learning anything. All right, I'm back. So let's see. So they're talking about value functions. This is a very long video, and I'm gonna like kind of stop here. I want to watch the rest of this, and I'd love to make a longer video about this, but yeah, I think that what I'm getting out of this is they're thinking pretty deeply about this. They know a lot about what's being done out there. Their perspective is valuable to me from that angle, but I don't think that they are really thinking about sort of the abstract like meaning of all this work they're doing. They're kind of geeking out on it and like doing it for the sake of doing it, but they aren't really thinking about it in the big context. And so a lot of what they're saying about what will and won't happen, I'm kind of going to disregard because I have my own opinions about that. And I have a very positive outlook about AI. I think that it's a lot like just having a smart person in the world. And maybe a lot of smart people. And just because there are a lot of smart people in the world doesn't mean that we're going to have any existential risk. It just means that we're going to have more smart people we can work with and rely upon. And especially if we get the motivation piece right, if they learn if they're rewarded for the right objectives, then we'll be in great shape. If we end up rewarding them for the wrong objectives, then we'll be in trouble. And I just think that we're going to do the right thing here for the most part. I think there'll definitely be bad actors. There always are. People who are motivated in ways that are in opposition of the common good. But there'll also be a lot of people who are aligned with the common good. And in the long run, people who are aligned with the common good will see the light of day. I mean, people will know about them. They won't know about the people who are not aligned with the common good, and therefore the people who are not aligned with the common good will stay in the shadows. And while they still will have an impact and effect, as soon as that impact sees the light of day, it'll be rejected. So I think we're going to be okay. That's just kind of a long way of saying I think we're going to be okay. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll try to do more of these little watch-alongs because I think it's good for me to think through these ideas and have to explain what I'm thinking, in my opinion, versus just watching it on my own and having these thoughts to myself. Well, see you later. Bye.